And welcome to GameSec. Today we're taking a look at some more games where the better version is on the weaker hardware. Pretty simple concept, don't you think? Or is that, don't you think? Don't ya? Don't ya? Don't ya? Don't ya? Which do you prefer? Anyway, this is a fun topic to cover, so let's start with something from Sunsoft. This is Batman, Revenge of the Joker on the Genesis, developed by Ringler Studio. You may remember this powerhouse American developer from their work on Mario Lemieux Hockey, and this game is every bit as good as that one was. And by that I mean, not good at all. You play as a gigantic, poorly drawn Batman with very few animation frames. Your hitbox is probably bigger than you are, so it's easy to take damage. Fret not though, as you can die and continue all you want. The only difference between dying and continuing is that it puts you back on the previous stage if you continue during a boss fight. But dying on that boss lets you try the boss again right away. There are no checkpoints in these stages, and in my experience, no way to refill your life meter. The good news is that these stages tend to be rather short. You get different weapons by shooting open crates. You can then shoot the weapon to change which one it is before you pick it up. Any one of them is preferable to the default weapon, which is basically useless. Why would Batman even build such a weak weapon? The bosses, including Captain Falcon here, all require hundreds of hits to defeat and are not very fun to fight. The graphics, as I mentioned, are poorly drawn and colored, but the parallax scrolling is pretty good in many spots. The music sounds rather thin, but you can hear some underlying good melodies. But come on, that doesn't matter much if the instrumentation is lazy as hell. This is probably tied with Batman Returns on the Genesis in overall quality. I don't know, maybe this one's a touch better. The same game is known as Batman Return of the Joker on the NES. Sunsoft developed this one themselves, no Ringworm Studio here. This one has the same stages and the same stage layouts. You're still too big and don't have much time to react, basically like the Genesis game. In fact, this one moves much faster than the Genesis version, so that means you have even less time to react. Batman also slides a little when you try to stop. Still, even with all that, this game just feels better to play. The physics are just more natural and just less janky to control. The bosses are a bit less ridiculous as well. I mean, if you have the right weapon, don't lose it. I also think that, for the most part, this game looks better. Sure, there's less parallax, but the artwork is certainly better. It still has tons of parallax though, and it's incredibly impressive for this console. It's also darker, which fits in more with the Batman vibe. Oh, and the sound and music are so much better. It has the same melodies, but instead they made sure it's, pleasant to listen to. This is how the game is meant to sound. Neither of these games are something that I want to pull down and play very often, but if I do play, you can damn well bet it's going to be the NES version. It's just better all around. Chrono Trigger was released on the Super NES from Square in 1995. I think this is my favorite RPG for this console. Every time I play it to capture footage, I get so enthralled and end up playing for hours. Anyway, you play as Chrono, and your job is not only to save the entire universe, but all of history and all of future as well. Well, kinda, but not really. Well, maybe. It's a time-traveling adventure with consequences, and for the most part, the story is written quite well. The battles aren't random, which means you can see enemies on the map before the battle starts. Once they see you, well, then you're off to fight the battle right then and there. Sometimes you can sneak around the enemies if you don't want to fight, but not all battles can be avoided. You'll get a lot of different characters in your party throughout the game. Like, a lot. Probably too many for my taste, but the game is still awesome. The graphics are nice, and the music is just so good. But what if you didn't grow up with the Super NES? Maybe you were cool and didn't have time for those old-style cartridge game consoles. I mean, you're old as dirt now, obviously, but back then, you were the young new thing. However, you still wanted to play this RPG that you heard so much about from your elders. Well, Square's gotcha, since they released Final Fantasy Chronicles Chrono Trigger on the PlayStation. Hells to the yeah, CD power! Check it out, these cutscenes are real anime! How cool is that? Everyone loves anime! Those old fogies with their cartridge games sure missed out. Or did they? I mean, the game here is basically identical to the Super Nintendo version. There's some new extras like a sound test and a scene viewer, as well as other things that can be unlocked. So, since it's in this episode, how can it be worse than the version on weaker hardware? 2 words. Loading time. Whenever you want to do anything in this game, the disc has to load. That means going from one area into another. Or from outside into a shop or whatever. Or simply selecting the menu to equip stuff or use items. Saving also takes longer since the PlayStation memory card is inherently much slower anyway, but you're not saving all the time, so I won't hold that against this game too much. But you know what activity you do all the time? Battles. Each battle you must load into and then out of the fight. It's rough. I'm not a programmer, but I don't understand how an entire area couldn't be contained in RAM and then the battle action happens when called for since the graphics don't need to change at all. My guess is that they couldn't slice up the original ROM in such a way, or they didn't have time to figure it out. Anyway, I'm betting that all of this extra loading time can add 2 to 3 more hours to your total playtime once it's all said and done. At least. Extra hours just spent waiting. The sound has also been messed with a little bit. They felt it needed more reverb, so they applied a reverb filter over the entire game. Why? It really didn't need this. Check it out. Seriously, even with the extras that the PlayStation version offers, you're going to be way better off playing on the Super NES. Okay, for these next couple of segments, let's take a look at compilations where they took some good games, remade them, and then released them on more powerful hardware. It's just too bad you're better off sticking with the originals on the weaker consoles. Mega Man: The Wily Wars on the Genesis from Capcom was an interesting collection. It contains the first 3 Mega Man games, but remade for 16-bit hardware with graphics and sounds representative of the futuristic 90s decade. Not only that, but gone is the clumsy password system. Now you have a game save feature. And then, once you beat all of the games, you get an additional mode to play through called Wily's Tower. Here, you can select weapons and items from all 3 games and then use them as you make your way through. Wow, all this is incredible. Can it get any better than this? Yes it can. How? By playing the original games on the NES. Sure, they're not all compiled into a single cartridge, big deal. And yes, you're going to need to use that password feature. And the graphics don't have that futuristic 90s sheen. But man oh man do they play so much better. The controls are much smoother. On the Genesis, there's a delay from when you press a direction to when you start moving that I called out a long time ago on GameSack. Now everyone knows about it. I mean, you can see it for yourself here. Look at that. The NES games actually have this as well, but it's nowhere near as severe. In fact, it's not a hindrance at all. This alone makes the Genesis games feel much worse to play. But that's not all. The Genesis games often have a lot of slowdown that happens when barely anything is on screen. Why? Sure, the NES games have occasional slowdown, but it doesn't feel as rough as the Genesis game, which honestly shouldn't have any slowdown at all. I'm playing the Retrobit version here. They claim that they fixed some of the slowdown, but any fixes were minimal as it's still pretty bad here. Capcom farmed the Genesis conversion out to the team who did the Game Boy Mega Man games, and they just weren't ready for the pure unlimited power that the 16-bit Sega Genesis offers. The NES games have far better music as well. The tunes are the same of course, but Capcom nor the developers that they assigned games to ever understood how to use the Genesis sound hardware. Even some of the graphics are worse on the Genesis. For example, on the NES here, once you defeat one of the giant snake heads, you scroll over to the next screen. No big deal, right? No, not at all, everything's fine. But in the Genesis game, the parts of the snake that move up and down have to disappear when the screen scrolls. Weak! Same when you start fighting bosses. Stuff is already there in the NES games. But in the Genesis, it needs to draw in when the screen stops scrolling. That's just sad. So yeah, if you have to choose one or the other, you are definitely going to be better off with the NES games. The Ninja Gaiden games on the NES from Tecmo are all pretty awesome. These are different and much better, I might add, than the arcade original, which I covered before in the first Better Than the Arcade episode. They pushed one of these games out per year for 3 years. What a time it was to be alive. You play as Ryu, everyone's favorite ninja who can't pull himself up from a ledge. Well, actually he gets a little better than that in subsequent games. The first game is a classic, of course, and as far as the gameplay and the controls are concerned, I feel they got better in each iteration. These games are also quite difficult, especially towards the end. They're all known for their cinematic cutscenes, which will leave you on the edge of your seat. And they all have music that's fairly catchy. What could go wrong bringing these games to a more powerful console? Well, that's exactly what they did with Ninja Gaiden Trilogy on the Super NES. Right off the bat, you'll see that the graphics are improved? No, you don't see that at all. Well, actually, if you look really close and compare them side by side, then you can see that they did make some changes to both the sprites and the backgrounds. Very minimal changes, mind you. This usually comes in the form of an extra shade or two of any given color, nothing is redrawn. The sprites see the biggest upgrade in this regard. Even the cutscenes have a few extra shades of color to make them look a little bit nicer. Okay, so it's not as nice of an upgrade as, say, Super Mario All-Stars was. It still looks decent, so what's the problem? Well, nothing. I accidentally put this game in the wrong episode. Sorry. Oh wait, there have been some changes, especially with Ninja Gaiden 2 and 3. In Ninja Gaiden 2, it's not so bad. Lightning is supposed to flash in the stage, and sometimes that made it impossible to see platforms in the original game. This was just part of the design. On Super NES, the lightning doesn't flash at all, so you can see everything clear as day for the entire stage. Now, you'd think this would make things tons easier, but I died so much more on the Super NES for some reason, but I don't think that had anything to do with the lack of lightning flashes. Ninja Gaiden 3 fares much worse. In the original game, this stage features some cool parallax scrolling as you advance through the level. Look at that looks awesome! On the Super Nintendo, it's completely flat. Why? Like seriously, what happened? And it's not just this stage either. This level lacks the foreground grass scrolling along. Hell, I'm amazed that they remembered to animate the mud or swamp water or whatever it is. The lava doesn't follow you at the bottom of the screen as you scroll up this stage. Nor do the rocks in the background dim in and out. Or how about the beginning of the final level? On the NES, this has some cool scrolling clouds when you're outside here. Since the airship that you're on is moving so fast, you get blown back a little bit in the wind. It makes sense! But on the Super Nintendo, you'd never know that the ship was flying at all as the clouds are completely still. However, you still get pushed back in the wind. It doesn't make any sense at all. What is pushing me? Why am I being pushed backwards? So again, what happened? They were able to keep the parallax in all of the cutscenes, and Ninja Gaiden 2 has its parallax stage perfectly intact. But it's not just this which is wrong. B and A control your attack and jumps, just like the NES version. However, this is extremely awkward on the Super NES pad as it's far more comfortable to use Y and B. And naturally, there's no option to change this, what the hell? Then there's the music, which they totally redid from scratch and they didn't bother to mimic the NES sound quality. It sounds like a Super Nintendo game, and some of the arrangements are even kind of interesting, but it just doesn't feel right. Well, actually, it kind of does work for a couple of the cutscenes, but not really the gameplay. Here's a couple of comparisons I cooked up just for you since we're friends, parasocially. So I'm not sure why this is so messed up in many different ways. It certainly feels rushed, but why did they rush it when it came out in the middle of the year? It's not like they were gunning for a Christmas release or anything. I don't know, I think I would have rather had an all-new Ninja Gaiden game exclusive to the console. I mean, who wouldn't? Alright, so these next couple of games are ones that a lot of people think that the weaker console has the better version. However, I'm not sure that I agree with them. But they're definitely worth a mention, as I can certainly see why people would prefer the supposed lesser version. Sonic the Hedgehog on the Genesis was a fairly popular game. You control a blue hedgehog who has a ton of different moves. You can run, you can jump, and you can spin dash when you're moving. The game emphasizes speed in many of its levels, and definitely in the advertising of the game. There's also some dastardly puzzles to solve, so make sure you have a big brain. The graphics were good for their time with lots of color, and the soundtrack was very memorable as well. I never usually get the shield power-up, as I don't like the dithered graphics, even when I was gaming in RF. And I still don't like them. Ah, that's better. Originally, I really liked this game a lot as a whole, but Sonic fatigue would quickly set in as they just kept on releasing more games and he was everywhere. That's really no surprise, since supposedly this game sold pretty well. It's also no surprise that Sonic ended up on the Master System and the Game Gear. This is the Master System version, which lets you see more of the screen. A lot of people like this one more than the Genesis game. Is it better? Well, Sega didn't handle this one themselves. They farmed it off to Ancient, who's best known for Legend of Oasis on the Saturn. Also, Streets of Rage 2 on the Genesis. This version is more of a regular platformer than the Genesis game. The first area is the Green Hill Zone, and it's fairly similar to the original, all things considered. However, there are a couple of things in this game that you're going to want to be aware of. First, if you get hit and lose all of your rings, they're gone. You can't grab them bouncing around like you can in the original. Next, if you grab 50 rings, you'll get to go to a bonus stage. Here, you can get an extra life and a continue. However, if you grab 100 rings during a stage, the ring counter resets. You'll gain the extra life, but you don't get to go into the bonus stage. For that reason, I always make sure to never get 100 rings. The Genesis game has 3 full stages per zone. To me, that always felt like a bit too much repetition. Here, there are 2 full stages per zone, and the third stage is dedicated to the boss fight. The boss fights here can be tricky, as the game does not allow you to have any rings no matter what when you fight them. I do like the platforming elements in some of these stages. The game as a whole is a bit more relaxing than the Genesis game, but don't let that fool you. It'll bite you in the ass if you're not careful. Like this part, going up the waterfall. There are lots of cheap deaths that await you if the ground scrolls even 1 pixel off of the screen. Ancient did this on purpose to screw with you. I lost a ton of lives. As annoying as it is, I think this might be one of my favorite stages in the game. I had a lot of fun with this one. The graphics are good for the console, with some nicely drawn backgrounds in some stages. The music by Yuzo Koshiro is quite excellent, again, for the console. So, is this better than the Genesis game? At this point in my life, I think I actually do enjoy it more just because I haven't played it anywhere near as much, and it's just trying to be a good game instead of the face of an entire company. But the Genesis game feels more like an arcade game compared to the Master System version. The physics and feel of the game are much better. It's more memorable for a reason, but the Master System game should not be overlooked. Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse on the Genesis is my favorite Disney game by far. It's also one of the classic early games on the system, and as a result it holds a spot in many gamers' hearts, blah blah blah. You play as Mickey, and your goal here is to save the entire world. Wait, it's not? Oh, you're just saving your girlfriend in this one. You go through lots of very well designed stages with tight controls. You get the hang of the gameplay very quickly. You butt stomp on the enemies by pressing either down or the jump button after you jump, but it works differently depending on what you press. If you hold down, you'll only bounce a little bit off of the enemies. but if you hold C, you'll bounce really high. You can also collect things to throw stuff to kill enemies. The gameplay feels perfect, the graphics are incredible for a cart with only 4 megs, and the music fits the game like a glove. What's not to like? Well, a lot of people, and I mean a lot, prefer Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse on the Master System. It's also on the Game Gear, but it's not optimized for that system. It's literally a Master System game in a Game Gear cartridge shell. So they both have the exact same field of view and all that. Once again, you're saving your girlfriend. The basic premise of the game is the same. However, the gameplay has almost been completely changed. You still have the butt stomp, but you need to press the action button to do it, not the jump button, nor can you hold down. Other than that, you can pick things up and carry them, then toss them to send enemies to hell so that they can suffer in pure anguish for all eternity. It's hell for you? Hell for you? Hope you enjoy hell, buddy. Spoiler, you won't. Hell for you? And hell for you. Bitch. Some items that can be carried won't disappear when you throw them and thus can be used strategically to help you get to new places. Can you do it? Sometimes you'll even need to find a key. Then you need to carry it all the way to the locked door to get past. Only true champions can do this. The stage design is all completely unique to this version. Well, except maybe swimming in the coffee or teacups or whatever they are, but you know, there's not really much design here. This one is far more exploratory in nature than the Genesis game. You gotta work your way around and figure out what to do to get past certain locations, whereas the Genesis game was more of a straight-up platforming game. Naturally, each of the 5 stages ends in a boss fight. Oh, and the stages tend to be quite a bit longer than the Genesis game, especially since there's more to do in each stage. Like I said, there are many people on this planet who've played both games and end up liking this one more. But I'm not one of those people. I've played through this one a few times and it is indeed very, very good, but I rarely get the urge to turn it on and play through it again like I do with the Genesis game. I play through it often and 1cc it, as the children say. So yes, I understand why many say that they prefer this version, but I'll never be on that side of the fence. I've got 2 more titles to show you, and I'll get to them right after I shut up. But first, I'd like to tell you, Virtua Fighter was a launch game for the Saturn. This 3D one-on-one fighting game was of course based on the massive arcade hit. In North America, this game was bundled in with the console. Now, I've never been a champion level player at Virtua Fighter or any other fighting game, or really any game at all to be honest, but that doesn't mean I'm not allowed to have fun playing it. And I did and still do enjoy playing this game despite my extreme suckage at it. The Saturn version here was clearly rushed, as there's a lot of clipping and glitchiness in the graphics. Like, a lot. Look at the ground, it can't even draw all the way to the end of the platform that you and the other polygon person are fighting on. How weak! The Saturn is stupid! Well, okay, not really, but this was definitely not a good first impression for most people. Especially since this game was the first time they were seeing anything on the console. The gameplay, and especially the music, are all still great though. 5 months later, Sega released Virtua Fighter on the 32X. First of all, I'm amazed that they even bothered to make this, but I'm glad that they did. The 32X is basically a dollar store Saturn in many ways. As you can see, the graphics are simplified. Here, the add-on is doing all of the polygonal work, while the Genesis does the flat backgrounds and the HUD. It runs at 30 frames per second, the same as the Saturn game, though it can slow down a bit during the replays. The good news is that the graphics aren't all glitchy, well, at least nowhere near as glitchy as the Saturn game was. In fact, this game is quite a showpiece for the 32X, as most games on this platform were basically just Genesis games with a couple of extra colors on screen that you probably wouldn't even notice. This one has more options than the Saturn game. For example, you can choose different camera views. This is normal, this is quarter view, or how about 3/4 view? Not sure who would like those. Then there's the high camera. And lastly, there's the sky camera. Ooh, look at us, we're in the sky. And let's not forget the widescreen mode that I can't seem to shut the hell up about. You can set this by enabling squeeze in the options. Lastly, this port has a tournament mode. I like how you can choose your colors and stuff. Gameplay-wise, it plays just as well as the Saturn game. Actually, I think they may have toughened up the later opponents a bit, so you may need to practice more. The sound is even pretty faithful for a cartridge game. Yeah, the samples are a little fuzzy, but I'm amazed that they're all here. The music sounds like the Genesis, but that in itself has its own charm. Of course, Sega would later release Virtua Fighter Remix for free on the Saturn as an apology, and it fixes most things and adds stuff that weren't there before, like textures. However, it doesn't have the 32X additions like the extra camera modes, the tournament, or the widescreen mode. Those features may or may not break it for you, but regardless, the 32X Virtua Fighter is still something to behold. Rodea the Sky Soldier was released on the Wii U in 2015 by NIS America. Well, they distributed the North American version. This is a Yuji Naka designed game. As you probably know, Yuji Naka is a brilliant programmer behind some of the amazing code that was in the original Phantasy Star and, of course, Sonic the Hedgehog. He desired to be more of a director though, so we'd get Knights on the Saturn out of him and then a few other games that didn't quite catch on, like Billy Hatcher, which I personally think is pretty fun for what it is. Anyway, here in Rodea, you play as a robotic sky soldier, hence the name of the game. The world here is kind of like Skies of Arcadia in that everything is floating in the sky. That means you spend the majority of your time flying around. You might start getting excited, thinking that this controls smoothly, like Knights did. No, it most certainly does not. Basically, you can run around on the ground, but there's not much you can do there. You really need to fly. In order to do this, you need to press and hold the A button to call up a reticle. You then aim at something, and if it's within reach, you can launch yourself there by letting go of the button. It's not intuitive at all. You only have a limited amount of flight power before you run out, but it's quickly restored if you land on something. You can also attack enemies. You do this by targeting them, and as you approach them, you press the B button. This feels awkward because, yes, you're using the B and A buttons again and what should be assigned to Y and B. I have a feeling that if Nintendo had only rotated the button labels 90 degrees clockwise back when designing the Super Nintendo, we'd never be in this mess. That's right, Y and B should have been B and A to begin with. I will absolutely die on that hill. Stupid Nintendo. So right there, it makes the already awkward controls feel more unnatural. What's more is that they don't give you an option to invert the camera, and I cannot get used to this. What the hell, you have to have that as an option. It's 2015. Or at least it was 2015, back in 2015. The camera is pretty wonky anyway, and this does not help. Overall, this is not a great game at all, but it could have been a lot better had someone who knew what the hell they were doing handled the controls. But check this out, in the same case is the regular Wii version. Let's see how this is. This version is actually the one that Yuji Naka worked on. He didn't touch the Wii U one, and it was finished in 2011. What happened is that Yuji Naka's company called Probe struck a deal with Kadokawa Games to be the publisher. For years, nothing happened and Yuji Naka didn't have a clue as to what was going on. Well, it turns out that Kadokawa was developing their own version of the game for the Wii U and 3DS, and the Wii version would be included with the Wii U game as a fun little bonus. This game is nearly 100% waggle controls, which seems odd to me as this game was made 5 years after the console launched, and I don't think that waggle was generally looked upon favorably at that time, but hey, maybe I'm wrong. You simply hold the B trigger, point the reticle where you want to fly, and then waggle the Wii remote quickly to launch yourself. It's so incredibly dumb. I'm very comfortable in saying that whoever thought this was a good idea should not be designing games. You press the A button to attack enemies. Despite these waggle controls, it's still way better than the Wii U controls. It says a lot when I'd rather require extensive carpal tunnel surgery later in life than play with the crappy Wii U controls. Moving throughout any given level is a lot easier. Now don't get me wrong, it's still not easy to navigate, and as a whole the game is still a bit sucky, but it sucks way less than the Wii U version. Kadokawa redesigned a lot of the levels for the Wii U game. It's similar, but a lot of things are missing. Often, you don't need to go off and find a room to disable level traps, and you're granted some power-ups automatically. Kadokawa also added some voice dialogue to the stages, but kept the cutscenes the same. The story is dumbed down a little and explained explicitly to you, not that the original story was complex or anything. Speaking of voice dialogue, they sure do talk a lot in this game. The voice acting is kind of annoying, mainly due to the high-pitched girl.
Just target a wall, then you'll kick off it once you hit it.
On the title screen, you can choose Japanese voices, which might be a little bit less annoying, but make no mistake, it's still pretty bad. I guess some well-known VO people do the Japanese voices, but I'm not weeb enough to appreciate that. Sorry. And beware, if you change the Wii U gamepad from Ion Wave to Game Screen, you get no audio at all, anywhere. The Wii U pad doesn't make any noise, the entire game is just silent. What the hell? Between chapters, the Wii U offers the ability to power yourself up, but I could never afford any of what they have to offer. The regular Wii version doesn't need any of this nonsense. Overall, the graphics are fine in both versions. Obviously, the Wii U version is much sharper since it's actually in HD. But the Wii U adds a weird sketch filter on top of many of the textures for some reason. Overall, despite the very real physical pain that playing this game for over 10 minutes causes me, I did find some enjoyment with the Wii version. Though I do wish the visuals and the locales had more variety. They should have just released this in 2011 by itself for the Wii, and then left it alone.
I can't remember.
Do you remember who ordered you to protect Garuda?
And there you go, more examples of games where the weaker console has the better version. Though I would probably argue against that in a couple of cases, as I talked about earlier in the episode. So what are some other games where you feel the weaker or weakest version is actually better? Let me know. In the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack.
It's time for the Game Master!
Hey guys, are you having problems getting past that tough level in a game? Do you have your cables crossed, or do you have some other video game needs here in 1992? Well, as always, the Game Master is here to help. And our first letter today comes from Sammy from Seattle, Washington, D.C. Sammy writes, "Dear Game Master," that's me. "In Street Fighter 2 on the Super Nintendo, how do I beat Wily?" Well, Sammy, in order to help with this question, I'm gonna have to get into the game. Whoa! Whoa! I made it. Hi, Ryu. Hey, Wily. Okay, Sammy, what you want to do is beat up Wily so his life bar drains before yours does. If you can do this twice, victory is yours. Hey, guys, watch it. Don't. No! Whoa! Wow, I made it out of there just in time! Our next letter today comes from Caspian from Portland, Wyoming. Caspian writes, "Dear Game Master, what's the best way to prolong battery life when I play my Game Boy?" What kind of name is Caspian? I don't like it. Go to hell, Caspian. Our next letter today comes from Billy from St. Paul, Arizona. Billy writes, "Dear Game Master, what's it like to be master of the gays?" Billy, I don't appreciate that. I'm the Game Master, not the Gay Master. Our final letter today comes from Chris from West Carolina. Chris writes, "Dear Game Master, I can't seem to get past floor 7 in expert mode in Super Monkey Ball on the Nintendo GameCube. Any tips?" Chris, this is 1992, and you know damn well that the GameCube won't be invented for around 9 years or so. So get the hell out of here with your nonsense. And that's all the time the Game Master has this week. See you next time.